So will the United States go forward with an attack? And how would Syrian defense systems handle the strike? Earlier, I spoke with Barry Pavel, who worked in the Bush and Obama administrations and who's now at the Atlantic Council. I asked him what his advice for President Obama would be.
If I were still there advising the president right now, I would say it's time to rip the Band-Aid off and do this and get it over with and stop all of the sort of possibilities for additional problems, complications, delays, countermeasures. It's time to do it. It's not a large, complex, major combat operation. That's not to understate the importance and the seriousness and the potential things that could go wrong, but this is nothing like Afghanistan or Iraq.
Talk to me about specific targets, the risks involved, because you told me that the president is a very analytical guy. I'm sure he walks through all of that. So what are some of the things that were outlined to him, do you believe, in the White House, and what are some of the risks?
Sure. Well, military operations are very sophisticated and they are unpredictable. The military has this saying, the enemy gets a vote, which means despite a plan that looks very smooth on paper, things happen, other people do things, complications develop, obstacles come up, missiles go astray. We saw this happen in 1999 when the Chinese embassy was hit in Belgrade. So I think there are risks. There's always risks with military operations. The idea here, I'm sure, is to minimize civilian casualties, because indeed one of the main purposes of this operation is to protect civilians from further suffering. But undoubtedly something will go wrong, and I also have no doubt that these possibilities have been gamed and red-teamed by the very earnest military planners that have been working so hard on this.
What does a strike look like to you?
So my understanding from press reporting, it hasn't happened yet, so we're all speculating, is that this is largely going to be focused on sea-launched Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles that likely will hit military targets that are not intermingled with civilian neighborhoods. So we're talking just generically ground bases, Air Force bases, Air Force units, runways, maybe military command and control sites.
Defense systems on the part of Syria, how sophisticated are they? What kind of obstacles do they pose?
So the Syrian air defense network is one of the more sophisticated in the world, a long ally of Russia and before that the Soviet Union, and so they have a reasonably dense integrated air defense network. But that said, the United States has the best air force in the history of the world. I would expect some of the initial strikes to be on Syrian air defense batteries and radars, in addition to the other targets that we talked about. So while they are sophisticated, they're no match for the United States.
And then the other question becomes, what happens after an attack like this? Because you talked about how anything can happen, basically. You mentioned the Chinese embassy, but we're seeing Israelis running out and buying gas masks. There's the concern that perhaps Syria tries to strike Israel, perhaps Iran does. I mean, what are some of the things that could go wrong with this scenario?
Well, you mentioned some of the things that could go wrong, but I think those possibilities are part of the reason why the White House seems to have been messaging very clearly, this is a very limited operation with one purpose. We do not want chemical weapons to be used again. This is not about regime change. And so I think because of that consistent messaging, one of the takeaways for Assad of Syria is don't do something stupid, don't retaliate, don't try to make this more complicated because it's going to make things a lot worse for you. All we're doing is hitting some of these military targets. Don't do this again. Now, I think there's a downside to that. I think the takeaway for Assad when this operation is over should be very severe, should be, I will never think about doing that again because the costs could be too great for my country and certainly for me.
Barry, thanks so much.
My pleasure.